God willing, today we'll be reading from Surah 53, verse 54. Let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. 53:54. Consequently, they utterly vanished. Which of your Lord's marvels can you deny? This is a warning like the older ones. The inevitable is imminent. None beside God can relieve it. Are you questioning this matter? Are you laughing instead of crying? Are you insisting on your ways? You shall fall prostrate before God and worship. So these are a continuation of verses from Surah 53, and this is referring to the evil communities of Sodom and Gomorrah that God is referring to, and they're referred to here as the lowliest communities because they had morally, gone to lows that no one in the world had ever been to before them, and they set the precedence for God. So many generations to follow that even up until now, people are following, this lifestyle of sinning that has, become so acceptable now in today's society as well, just like it was at this time. And God annihilated these people after sending a messenger. And God says, which of your Lord's marvels can you deny? This is a warning like the older ones. Now, which of your Lord's marvels can you deny is mentioned in Surah 55, but here it's mentioned in the verse 55 of Surah 54, and I believe there is a mathematical correlation between those. I don't have the details in front of me at this point, but just wanted to point that out. And God says that people are still insisting on their ways instead of worshiping God and prostrating before Him and obeying God, and they should be crying, and instead they're rejoicing in the things that these people are doing and insisting on their ways, and quote unquote fighting for their quote unquote rights instead. And they're gonna find out that what they're striving for obviously is going to lead them to hell, and then they're gonna find out obviously it's gonna be too late. So God willing, I'll continue reading Surah 54. Surah 54, the moon, Al-Qamar. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. The hour has come closer and the moon has split. Then they saw a miracle, but they turned away and said, "All magic." They disbelieved, followed their opinions, and adhered to their old traditions. Sufficient warnings have been delivered to alert them. Great wisdom, but all the warnings have been in vain. So the footnote says, this important sign of the approaching end of the world came to pass in 1969 when humans landed on the moon and brought pieces of the moon to Earth. At the same time, God's mathematical miracle of the Quran was being gradually unveiled. Traditional Muslims opposed it since it exposed the fallacy of their practices. Appendix 25. So as the footnote states, this is referring to the splitting of the moon, which happened in 1969, and there's several facts around it that point out to this and confirms this. And we have, this is mentioned also about God. So it's at the same time, it says God's mathematical miracle was being unveiled, and this is further explained in Appendix 25. And so, if we look at Appendix 25, this is referring to end of the world, and it's one of the approaching signs of the end of the world. And so, um, it mentions here that the first thing, if you see under the signs of the approaching end of the world, the splitting of the moon, it says this already happened in June 1969 when we landed on the moon and brought back moon rocks. And people on Earth can go now to many museums, colleges, and observatories to look at the pieces of the moon, and then discovering the mathematical miracle, happened just around the same time in 1974. And So it says, then they saw a great miracle, but they turned away and said old magic. So clearly it's talking about the mathematical miracle here, which happened right after the splitting of the moon. And there's many people that think that the moon landing was fake, but and they have like various conspiracy theories around it. But we understand from this verse, on top of everything else, that humans did actually land on the moon. And if that wasn't the case, I mean, all these other countries, like for example, Russia and China, who have subsequently also landed on the moon, especially China, would have exposed, this idea. But obviously, there are signs when we landed on the moon, that confirm that we actually did land on the moon. And I think even India recently landed on the moon. But this is definitely a sign, and we have rocks, moon rocks, as it says in the footnotes that people can find. Sorry, in the appendix, and so you can actually go and see those moon rocks, and you can tell by looking at the structure of those rocks that they're not from anywhere from planet Earth, and they have highly reflective surfaces. Um, God willing, I will continue reading. Verse 6 says, ignore them, the day will come when the caller will announce a terrible disaster. With their eyes humiliated, they come out of the graves like scattered locusts. As they respond to the caller, the disbelievers will say, this is a difficult day. The people of Noah disbelieved before them. They disbelieved our servant and said, crazy. He was persecuted. He implored his Lord, I am oppressed. Grant me victory. We then opened the gates of the sky, pouring water, and we caused springs to gush out of the earth. The waters meant to effect a predetermined decision. The ark, we carried him on a watercraft made of logs and ropes. It ran under our watchful eyes, a reward for one who was rejected. We have set it up as a lesson. Does any of you wish to learn? How terrible was my retribution after the warnings. We made the Quran easy to learn. Does any of you wish to learn? So these verses are referring to the day of judgment, and God says, ignore them. These people who are mocking and ridiculing God's message, they called it old magic. When you share the mathematical miracle with people, they really downplay the significance of the miracle in many ways, and they just call it numerology, and think that it's something that was just old. And it's so amazing because when we understand the intricacy of the Quran's mathematical code, and how extraordinary it is, and impossible it is, in terms of just simple laws of probability, you can see that it is impossible for something like this to haphazardly have taken place and organized itself in such an intricate manner. But because these people decide to be disbelievers, I mean, they can't scientifically prove that this is not from God, right? So we have a miracle now, subhanallah, I mean, that is so strong that uh, it's proven by science, okay? And you cannot use science to disprove it, right? It's just mathematically proven. It's just like a law that, whether you like it or not, you have to accept it because it's proven, right? It's not a theory or anything. It's a proven fact, which is proven by simple laws of mathematics that it is impossible to have happen on its own. Like the probability just diminishes, um, by many zeros, like it's impossible. So people don't really have an excuse. But what happens, you see people trying to resort to things like character assassination of the messenger, or, just calling names and saying things like, yeah, magician, crazy, all this stuff, right? But really, obviously, we know, subhanAllah, that this has no basis. And so these people who are making up, these insults and ridiculing the message are going to find out on the day of judgment. I mean, like, they're going to find out exactly, how they condemn themselves to hell. And eventually, I mean, that remorse at that time is just going to be useless for them, right? But it's going to be too late. And God says they're going to be humiliated on that day for a fact, obviously, for doing what they did. And they will be like scattered locusts. I mean, we know, like, the believers, they will emerge like butterflies, and the disbelievers will be like scattered locusts, right? So when the butterflies emerge, obviously, if you observe it, um, like, it's a beautiful sight to see. You see colors all around, and with their majestic wings and colorful patterns, and there's a lot of beauty around it, right? With the locusts, I mean, they're all submitting creatures of God, right? But still, like, it's just a mess in itself, and it's not, I guess, the most beautiful thing to see. It's, if anything, it makes you cringe. Imagine, being surrounded by these things. You're just gonna run away. But if you're around flies, I mean, you'd still enjoy watching them and looking around, anyways. But this is just an allegory, of course, for us. Obviously, they're both God's creatures, and it's nice to see God's signs. But if you compare this, with the, beautiful butterflies emerging out of their cocoons versus, these swarms of scattered moths, there are two different things, right? And so these will all be airborne, but they'll be the believers will be, their faces will be, as it says, shining with God's light, and their souls will be nourished. On the other hand, the disbelievers will have misery on their faces. They're terrible, and from what we can imagine, I mean, it's going to be a very difficult time for them, and so it's just going to be an environment where you can imagine it's going to be they're going to be disgusted with themselves on that day. Verse 9 says, the people of Noah disbelieved before them as well. And we can see that, it's a very similar parallelism that is God is drawing between the people of Noah versus the people of Dr. Rashad Khalifa in this time, where they said the same thing about him. You can see very similar, you can see many similarities actually between the two. And specifically, the Messenger of the Covenant has referenced, Noah in one of his perspectives, saying the same thing, that, just like the time of Noah, people who stand with the messenger, follow the truth, follow the message in its core, upholding the Quran alone and worshiping God alone in the way God has detailed for us by His Messenger through the Quran, they're going to be saved. But all the other people are going to suffer miserably in this world and in the hereafter, specifically, just like the people of Noah did. And his example is here as a reminder for us. He implored God, the same way Noah implored God, and we have that documented. And he says he asked God to grant him victory, and God then opened the gates of the sky, as it says, pouring water, and the flood, caused these people to be annihilated as a result, and Noah and those people who followed with him were made the victors, and God allowed them to inherit the earth as a result, while the disbelievers were annihilated. It says in verse 13, the ark, we carried him on a watercraft made of logs and ropes. It ran under our watchful eyes, a reward for one who was rejected. We set it up as a lesson. Does any of you wish to learn? How terrible was my retribution after the warnings. We made the Quran easy to learn. Does any of you wish to learn? And so another thing we see that, the statement that we made the Quran easy to learn, does any of you wish to learn, is repeated over and over in these verses. And God is talking about all of these different communities as we go forward. All of these communities are mentioned, and the same thing it says at the end of each one of their lessons, that we made the Quran easy to learn. Does any of you wish to learn? Right? And so the thing is, there's very few people who wish to learn what is in the Quran, and people who have been given the Quran have, disregarded the Quran. And even though the Quran was given to them in their own language, they decided to uphold conjecture and guesswork, and just doesn't make any sense, like why people would, opt for something that is man-made completely and is filled with contradictions and hearsay and nonsense, and trade it, for something so cheap, something that God gave to us that was from the creator of the universe. Imagine his revelations, his words, and you just put it away like, like it's garbage, right? If you think about it, like something that God has given to you should be something that you should hold very dearly to you. I mean, yes, they give it this symbolic respect by wrapping it in a nice cover and putting it on top of the shelf or whatever, but the real respect for the Quran is to open it and read it and get the true value out of it by actually reading it. I mean, if you get the best book in the world, you can, and you're reading it in a foreign language, let's say, it's not going to help you until you try to understand what's in the book and you apply it, right? But this book, I mean, even though and we're talking about people who actually speak Arabic, right? But imagine other people as well who have the book and they don't even speak the language and they don't even care to understand or learn what is in it. People memorize the Quran. Many people around the world have memorized all the verses of the Quran. I mean, that's obviously one way of preserving the actual Quran through many centuries, right? But what about the meaning of these verses? Very few people would even know that what the verses actually say, let alone what they mean, when it comes to the meaning of these verses. And they clearly are so blocked, most of them, that they don't even realize that the Quran is saying all these things which they completely go against. If the Quran is saying something and then they come across hadith that's saying something else, they would completely have no issues discarding what the Quran says and just going for the hadith, right? And we should not be like that. There are people among submitters or who would call themselves who have done the same thing, right? The Quran says something and then they come across something um, or some hearsay even about the messenger from some person who claims that the messenger said this or that, and they completely disregard what the Quran is saying, even what the messenger is documented saying to us in videos and stuff, and obviously the Quran is saying the same thing. They would disregard it for hearsay from people, because I mean, this is very similar to hadith, right? And ironically, people are doing that still. History repeating itself, but um, God is telling us that He has made the Quran easy to learn for us. And really, when we look at it, I mean, even now when we look at it in the English, right? It's so easy to learn, and it's not something that, I mean, it's we have the authorized English version of the Quran, which is very simple to understand. It's in English that anyone can understand. Any English speaking person, it's written in everyday English language. Obviously, you'll find words that you may have to look up, if you're not proficient in the English language. But for people who speak English, this is the best translation of the Quran, and definitely the most accurate when it comes to the meaning, because it's not a literal translation where idioms and proverbs, etc., are translated in the based on the equivalent expressions that are used in the English language. Like for example, verses that talk about not beating around the bush. If you see in Arabic in literal words, it's saying do not enter from the back door. But in English language, I mean, we say you should be straightforward, do not beat around the bush, right? So this means that it's not a literal translation, and some people will look at the translation and try to use it to criticize the Messenger of the Covenant, saying that he didn't translate the Quran right, and they came up, people like Adib and other people came up with their own translations, and not just Adib, some other people did as well with other languages. But we understand that this is not a literal translation, and it is an authorized English version of the Quran. Even the Arabic, God has made the Quran very easy to learn, and the way He preserved it, also with the memory bells, and that is explained later in the appendices as well, describes how God made the Quran easy for us to learn, and also how God repeats things in the Quran over and over, and how He keeps the subject revolving, how things repeat and how things change. I mean, if you look at the patterns, He makes it so that we're not bored. It's like when you look at a movie. Sometimes you see a movie and it starts in a very sequential manner, like a very chronological sort of a thing. You see someone's a child, and then they grow up to be, let's say, a teenager, and then in middle age, and then old age, and their story goes like that, right? But that's not a very exciting way to go through the story. I mean, yeah, you can understand it in one way, right? But then imagine if you shuffle it around in a way where it's mixed up. That sort of makes it interesting, and it's sort of put together in relevance, while making it exciting. It doesn't bore you. Like, you see part of the story, and then for what happens next, you have to come back. I mean, I don't know if I'm explaining it right? But the way that God has sectioned, all these different subjects in the Quran and repetitions, the way it has done, it is to facilitate the Quran in our memory, also to make it interesting, and make it easy for us to learn, and make it so that we're never bored by reading it, because the subjects keep revolving around, and how God has connected them together also. I mean, of course, it's not like any other book which talks to you as you go through it. It is hard to even explain, But it's a book that through many ways, God has made it easy for us to learn. And for people who actually study this book every day, understand that they can study this Quran for years, but they still never get bored from reading it, and it still continues to unravel, new meanings and new information for us, for the times to come up until the end of the world. And verse 18 says, Ad disbelieved. Consequently, how terrible was my retribution after the warnings. We sent upon them violent winds on a day of continuous misery. It tossed the people around as if they were decayed palm tree trunks. How terrible was my retribution after the warnings. We made the Quran easy to learn. Does any of you wish to learn? Thamud rejected the warnings. They said, shall we follow one of us, a human being? We will then go astray, then end up in hell. Did the message come down to him instead of us? He is a flagrant liar. They will find out tomorrow who the flagrant liar is. We're sending the camel as a test for them. Watch them and be patient. Inform them that the water shall be divided among them. The camel shall be allowed to drink on her designated day. But they persuaded their friend to kill the camel, and he obliged. Consequently, how terrible was my retribution, they have been warned. We sent upon them one blow, whereupon they became like harvested hay. We made the Quran easy to learn. Does any of you wish to learn? And so, this is Ad is one of the communities that God talks about, where they also disbelieved, and as a result, God's retribution struck them, and violent winds were sent to them, which continued to toss the people around as if they were palm tree trunks, decayed palm tree trunks. And if you look at decayed palm tree trunks, how they're tossed around. If you have strong winds, they're pretty. It's pretty interesting to see that. They're slammed around by a violent wind. It's a very harsh expression, to think about. If you see those trunks, how they slam, thinking, if they were human bodies, you can imagine that it was really terrible, and that's really what it says. It says, how terrible was my retribution after the warnings, right? So it was it would be extremely exacting for these people, obviously excruciating pain that they went through, their annihilation, but all of that, why? Because they decided to oppose God. They decided not to follow. Obviously, it's God's system. We're here for a purpose, and they were given a chance to take heed, to listen to the message, to kill their ego and reform, but they decided to disbelieve, right? And we can see the same thing here. It talks about Thamud. They did the exact same thing. They said, oh, should we follow a human being like us? And what did they say? Like, we will then go astray and end up in hell. That's what they said about the messenger of the covenant too, right? That's what they said about every messenger, that they thought that the messenger who's coming from God to help them is coming to misguide them, to send them to hell. And so that's what they tell the believers. If you follow this person, you're going to go to hell because this person's astray. And we can see the same thing, constantly people are referring to the messenger of the covenant. I'm watching these comments on YouTube all the time, and people are saying all kinds of nonsense, like calling him Dajjal and all this stuff, right? And saying that, he's from Satan and all this nonsense, right? And he's coming from God just to enlighten these people by God's leave, that they're stuck in complete darkness, and they're so obsessed with their idol worship of Muhammad that they don't care what the message is being sent to them by God, and they think that they're going to go to hell. This is how Satan has tricked these people, and but really what you see is jealousy, right? You see that these people are jealous because the message came to him instead of them, right? So messengership is a test because it is a test for these people to kill their egos, and especially the people who are contemporary to the time that the messenger is alive, can't accept the fact that the message has been given to someone other than them. So they want to be the messengers themselves in order to get the message, because their egos are so big, right? So that's why messengership is an essential test. That's why, for example, the messenger of the covenant had to announce his messengership to people, because people had to be tested for this big test, because they have to kill their egos. And this is why we see that when the messenger of the covenant was alive, when he was talking about the miracle, people had no issues, like treating him as a hero and promoting the miracle. And the moment they found out that he was a messenger, you see that how they, made an about face and started opposing him and calling him names and such, because it was such a difficult test for them. And it's a difficult test for all people to accept a new messenger when it happens, right? But at the same time, for people who accept the message, actually, it is a lot of credit for these people, and this is a blessing from God, that he does that. But it's not an easy test. And for these people, that God talks about, they were sent a camel as a test, and the camel knew what day it was supposed to drink, and this was a sign for these people, because you cannot train a camel or any animal for that matter to know what day of the week it is. But this camel knew a specific day that it was supposed to drink, but they decided to kill the camel, right? And we can see the similarity here too, that God sent a message, a proof, mathematical proof, and what the Arabs decided to do, they decided to try to destroy the miracle, try to hide the miracle, so that the people don't accept it. They found it so repulsive that God has sent a message that they wanted to hide it, and they did the same. These people did the same thing with the camel. They decided to kill the camel, so that people will not get the message, right, in this way, and God says, consequently, how terrible was my retribution. And they became like harvested hay, right? So if you look at harvested hay, you basically, there's nothing left, right? It's just rubbish, basically. And God says, we made the Quran easy to learn as any of you wish to learn. And so we can see the same statement being repeated, that he made the Quran easy to learn. And rhetorically, God is asking these people, does any of you wish to learn? The Quran is there for people. We have the mathematical proof now, subhanAllah, to back it up. And so, God willing, I'll continue reading verse 33. The people of Lot rejected the warnings. We showered them with rocks. Only Lot's family was saved at dawn. We blessed him and his family. We thus reward the appreciative. He warned them about our requital, but they ridiculed the warnings. They negotiated with him about his guests. We blinded them. Suffer my retribution, you have been warned. Early the next morning, a devastating retribution struck them. Suffer my retribution, you have been warned. We made the Quran easy to learn as any of you wish to learn. So this is referring to the people of Lot, as talks about, the evil communities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were, as we discussed earlier in the study, were people who practiced homosexuality on earth for the first time. And these people were annihilated as a result of not following the messenger and disbelieving the messenger, disbelieving in the warnings, ridiculing the warnings. And so God says, there was only one house that was left. One family that was saved, right? And that in that town, all the others were annihilated. So imagine they were all homosexuals and disbelievers, except Lot's family, and they were the only ones that were saved as a result. And God says, we blessed him and his family, we thus reward the appreciative, right? So we must be appreciative of the message, the guidance that God has given us, and be thankful for His guidance. Obviously, we see, the world and people headed in the same way, and we know that God's retribution is near for these people as well, because they're doing the exact same thing. They have been warned, and in the same way, these people have been ridiculing the warnings. And so, in the case of Lot, God sent the angels in the form of a human being. I mean, what a test for these people, that they don't realize that these people are brought for their destruction, and they are, harassing these people, right? Because they want to have sex with them, even though they know that they're, from their appearance, outward appearance, they look like they're males. And eventually, they're there to annihilate these people. And God says, early the next morning, a devastating retribution struck them, and God says, suffer my retribution, you have been warned. And these people were obviously punished severely for what they were doing. And people are doing that now openly, and you talk to them about people of law, they don't, it doesn't faze them at all. They're so absorbed in this lifestyle and this lustful way that they're so proud of, right? That they don't care what you say. And with the audacity, I mean, they will attack you and call you names, make you feel like you're the outcast. And I mean, if I mean, they've made it so difficult for people to even say something about it, right? With all of the work that they have done, especially in the Western civilization. I mean, it's so difficult to even speak up against what they believe, right? Now, obviously, God has given us complete freedom to believe or disbelieve. So if the people want to be homosexuals, if they're allowed to be homosexuals, right? But there's no compulsion in religion either, so you cannot prohibit it. If they want to disbelieve, yeah, go ahead and disbelieve. But as far as I'm concerned, I can condemn it based on my religion. I can say that this is not from God. This is satanic, and this is my religion. If it offends you in any way, that's fine. I mean, I'm not obviously, but at the same time, if we're in these places, we have to understand that we cannot like use that as a way to discriminate against people when it comes to, for example, basic human rights or things like that, obviously, because God has allowed them to live just the same way as any other disbelievers. And if they choose to disbelieve, let them disbelieve, right? But at the same time, we're not going to be a part of it, and we're not going to play along with saying that what they're doing is right. Like, for example, people who say, yes, we don't judge you for what you believe in, and if you have if you want to marry another man, like it's good, or anything like that. Obviously, we say that this is not from God, this is satanic, and that's the truth. So if you have people around you that you're aware of, that are frank with you in this way about their lifestyle, you have to let them know that this is wrong, and that, as the messenger says, you should try to talk them out of it, right? So obviously, talking them out means that you have some dialogue going on with these people in a sort of amicable way, that at least you can talk to them and try to talk them out of it. Obviously, if you're just gonna be I guess confrontational or anything like that, obviously you can't talk them out of it, right? But you have to let them know that this is wrong and this is bad for them, and talk them out of it as best as you can, God willing. Otherwise, God says, beware of the retribution that will not be limited to the evildoers among you. So even though you might not be doing it, but if you okay this sort of behavior, and you allow this sort of behavior to flourish without showing any sort of opposition to it, then you are complicit in allowing this thing to happen, right? so you have to let your stance be known. At the same time, you cannot prohibit them from doing what they're doing. Like, for example, um, people who want to follow this lifestyle and want to preach this lifestyle, let's say, to schools or whatever, um, they have the freedom to do so also, right? But you have the freedom to preach your religion. You have the freedom to preach the right values. So, for example, in the past, we came across people who were trying to prohibit these people from like teaching this to other children and stuff in libraries and all that, having events and stuff, and they were like protesting to ban these things, right? But you when they have the freedom, they have the freedom. People want to disbelieve, you let them disbelieve. You cannot have compulsion. But when you try to ban stuff and things like that, I mean that's compulsion, right? And that's not freedom, and that's not what God wants. God doesn't want people to be afraid because of the government to not do sins. For example, like homosexuality is punishable by death in certain countries. So people will not do that uh, because of the fear of the government, right? But God doesn't want that. God wants people to not do these things for the fear of God, not the fear of government, so that people can be tested. And that's the extreme libertarianism that we are taught in the Quran. If someone wants to believe, let them believe. If someone wants to disbelieve, let them disbelieve, right? But we preach the truth, we preach the right values, and if people want to go ahead and choose bad things, evil things, then that's obviously upon them, and they deserve to go in that way. But we just simply invite them to the truth. As you can see, the messenger was there with these people, and all he did was he advised them. He said, here's are my daughters, if you must, like don't do this thing, it's wrong. And they didn't listen, and they paid for it, obviously. And eventually, God saved him and his people. Verse 41 says, Pharaoh's people were warned. They rejected all our signs. Consequently, we requited them as an almighty, omnipotent should. Are your disbelievers better than these disbelievers? Are your disbelievers better than those disbelievers? Have you been absolved by the scripture? Perhaps they think we will be the winners. All of them will be defeated. They will turn around and flee. The hour is awaiting them, and the hour is far worse and more painful. Certainly the guilty are astray and will end up in hell. They will be dragged into the hellfire forcibly, suffer the agony of retribution. Everything we created is precisely measured. Our commands are done within the blink of an eye. We annihilated your counterparts. Does any of you wish to learn? So these verses are pretty self-explanatory. I'm also sort of running over time. I just want to end here by saying that, all these examples are given to us, and God's system does not change, so people continue to oppose God, they can expect the same consequences. And we can see that, eventually God says the hour is awaiting them. People who are doing evil will eventually pay the price for what they're doing. But God says everything He's created is precisely measured, and God's commands are done within the blink of an eye. And God says He annihilated the counterparts. Does any of you wish to learn? With this, God willing, I will end. If you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free. Thank you.
SubhanAllah. Thank you, brother. God bless you.
So I think also Brother Salim shared, he's probably watching on YouTube. So he shared uh, some mathematical proofs around Surah 54. It says, we made the Quran easy to learn as any of you wish to learn. It references, it's mentioned in verses 17, 22, 32, and 40, right? And so if you add that, all these numbers, like 54 plus 17 plus 22 plus 32 plus 40, plus the geometrical value of the verse, which is 2293, you get 2,458, whose digits add up to be 19. MashaAllah. Thank you, brother.
Suleman.
Yes?
So you know the chapter of the Quran we just went over. So what chapter number was it again?
Sorry,
Because
what
I
was
came
that?
in a bit late. I know the chapter of the Quran we just went through right now.
Uh-huh.
What chapter was it? Because I came a bit late.
This was Surah 54 we were reading. We started from 53, verse 54, and we ended at Surah 54, verse 51.
Okay. Thanks.
So, are there any comments or questions from anyone about the verses that we read? Okay, so there's quite a lot of information about the splitting of the moon with the mathematical findings. God willing, I'll share some in chat maybe, and also maybe in WhatsApp. Because I know Brother Salim also shared quite a lot about that. So So there's more. This is pretty much about it, right? This was also 1995. I thought there was some more I had seen somewhere, but yeah, so if we see that, so you put July 27, July 21st, 1969. So 2107, 1969 is a multiple of 19. And then you have the lunar module landed on the 20th of July. So 7/20/1969 is also a multiple of 19. And then the moon in 54:1 is the 19th occurrence of the word from the beginning of the Quran. It's mentioned a total of 26 times, but it's the 19th occurrence. And so you can see that 54:1, the universal time when it landed was 17 hours, 54 minutes, and 1 second, right? It's like 5:54 universal time and 1 second. So you can see 54 and 1 is referring to Surah 54 verse 1. So exact time and exact minute and second was coded by God, but it's, mentioned in the Quran. And if you add the surah number and the verse number, and the day and the month and the year, you get 2052 or 19 times 108, which is also a multiple of 19. And then there are 4,845 verses from the beginning of the Quran to 54:1, which is also a multiple of 19. And then Surah 54 has 55 verses. And if we write 50, and so it says there are 4,845 verses from the beginning of the Quran to 54:1, and 48:45 is a multiple of 19, which I already mentioned. So also the prophecy in verse 54:1 in the Quran to the end of the Quran, also from the prophecy in 54:1 to the end of the Quran, there's 1,389 verses, which is the Islamic year for 1969. 1389 is equivalent to 1969 in the Islamic year. So that is another sign. And then 55, which is the number of verses, plus with next to it, if you write 1389, it will give you the exact day, month, year it landed on the moon. In other words, 5/5/1389, the Islamic year. So fifth day of the 5th month of the Islamic year in the year 1389, which is equivalent to 20th of July 1969. Also, if you add the digits of 1389 or 4845, they both add up to be 21. And 1485 was 4845 was the verses from the beginning of the Quran to 54:1, and then from 54:1 to the end of the Quran was 1389 verses. So both of them, the digits add up to be 21, which is the 21st of July that NASA lifted off the moon. Which means that when the actual splitting happened. All right. Anybody has any comments or questions? Okay, so if there are no questions in reference to the verses, maybe if there are any off-topic questions, God willing, we can discuss those. Okay, so I guess there are no other questions. So thank you all for joining us. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Wednesday. So we changed our time from Tuesday. So now the other study will be also at 9:30 a.m. but on Wednesday. So we have two studies now. One is Wednesday at 9:30 Pacific time, and the other one is Saturday. This one at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So the next study would be on on Wednesday at 9:30 Pacific time. God bless you guys. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.